And I'm very excited actually for this session today because we have an author who I have been honored working with her personally, and very touched to have you here, Faith. So thank you for joining us. I still remember the first time that I saw you speak at Intellects. I don't know if you recall this or not in your presentation, but you were talking about how we can get up and learn from our failures. And one thing that you said to me that I always, whenever I feel my lowest, I think about is that you said that when you're feeling down and you're feeling like you can't get up, just remember you can't fall off the floor. And it's just very powerful to remember, like there is a foundation and that you can always get back up, and to leverage the supports around you, that you're not alone, and I really enjoyed reading your book and learning a piece of you, reading your book and your personal story. When I first met you, you were the Chief Human Resource Officer, which is a big title, a big executive fancy title. And we look at our executives as almost not human, superior to us. And reading your book put me in check that we're all human. We all have pasts. And some of our pasts are not beautiful, right? But when I finally came into your office and disclosed to you what was going on, your gentleness and the way that you just humanized that I didn't deserve to be treated like that helped change my frame of looking at valuing myself and my self-worth. So I just wanted to thank you for that, because what you do makes a difference. And I know that HR doesn't always hear that, but it does. So Gary, I'm going to hand it to you to introduce our guests.
Hey, thanks, Tamara. Well, earlier this year on Meet the Author, Rosa Carrillo spoke about the role of a health and safety advisor and what could be done to improve relationships with business decision makers. Well, today we're going to extend that conversation, and as Tamara says, to the HR professional. So I too am really pleased that Faith, that you've joined us for today. So welcome to our show.
Thank you.
So let me fill in some of the blanks that Tamara didn't fill in. Well, obviously you're a highly accomplished global HR leader, and you've really inspired and motivated people like Tamara to aim for success through resilience and determination. And resilience is a big word in my vocabulary, and determination, yeah, that's another one for two. And you have worked in different executive roles, like I said, in Intellects, but you've also worked at ULC, Industrial Scientific Corps, Randstad Canada, and First Canadian Title. And I really liked that in 2016, you were named one of Canada's 23 top Black Canadians to watch. You've been indicted in the Pylan School of Business Hall of Fame in 2021, and you're a member of the school's BBA Program Advisory Council. And currently, you're a senior talent advisor with Mars Discovery District. And you also provide mentoring and coaching services as a consultant. So welcome, Faith, to our show.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Tamara. It's always nice to hear back some of the things that I've said and that it's inspired you, and it touches my heart, and I'm grateful for you and grateful for this opportunity to meet Gary and your great organization and what you're doing, really just to connect people with industry leading practices and just, humanizing some of the things that we do on a daily basis. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the great introduction.
Well, titles are always interesting, as you said, Tamara. I think, Rosa, you were a VP of HR once, am I correct? Oh, no, you weren't there? Okay, I knew you. Oh, you got your, yeah. You're on mute right now.
Has to happen at least once during the show.
Yeah.
I was going to say it was organizational development. Yeah.
Organizational.
Close cousin to HR.
Right, exactly. Well, you've had, Faith, Chief People Officer, Senior VP HR, and I like this last one, VP of Employee Experience. That sounds really exciting. So can you tell me, different titles, but were the responsibilities similar or quite different?
The responsibilities were very similar because it depended on the different organizations and their different titling convention. So the one that you like, VP of Employee Experience, that was a director that worked on my team. We thought that tying customer experience is a big thing for organizations, right? So you move from customer service to customer experience. So we moved from HR to the employee experience. So it's looking at the full life cycle of the employment experience and really looking at strategies to develop along that entire life cycle. So it tied in directly with the business goals of meeting their customers' experience. We wanted to ensure that top of mind was the whole employee experience and the employee journey. So,
right, okay. Well, I think when I think of HR, I see a whole bucket of different things, ranging from pure negotiating labor contracts, and right now as we're speaking here, the auto employees, the union, are out on strike. So what does that mean? How is HR involved with that? Then you get obviously to the other end where there's how do you bring people in, talent attraction, and obviously you look at OD like you did, Rosa, and organizational development and a whole bunch of things. So if you had to pick one HR responsibility that maybe is giving you the biggest challenge, Faith, which one would it be?
Yeah, if I can pick two,
okay,
I'll make the first one really quick. The biggest, the first one is compensation, right? And especially in today's market, right, where you're seeing interest rates skyrocket, you're seeing cost of living skyrocket, and you're not seeing your pay skyrocket. So a huge challenge is keeping up with markets in terms of how we pay people and pay organizations. And what folks are seeing is the typical 2.5%, 3% increases. That's just not going to cut it daily. So that is a constant challenge that companies need to continue to review what's relevant in the market and what's relevant to salaries. We're seeing that with negotiations with Metro, right? You just recently mentioned the big three in the US car companies striking, but here in Canada, Metro workers, one of them said, we work for Metro, but we can't shop at Metro. And that was huge to me. So you really have to think about the value of what you're placing on employment contracts and how that is going to motivate employees. And that is a constant thing that you need to not just do once a year. It's something you need to revisit constantly while being fiscally responsible. So it's not easy and there is no perfect solution, but that one is something that's always top of mind for HR professionals. The other one closely ties with, what we're going to be talking about a little bit more and what, Rosa has written about. It's really about ensuring, psychological and mental health safety in organizations. So diversity, equity, and inclusion has become a buzzword, which it shouldn't be. It really is looking at the whole individual and ensuring that you have leaders that are capable to ensure these safety pillars are in place for people to feel like they belong and that they work in a culture that really supports who they are and supports their growth. So that's another big one for us that, again, there's never one size fits all. It really is working with the leaders in the organization to look at, how are you training your leaders to manage people so that we don't have to follow up and do these investigations because people feel slighted, they feel harassed, they feel that the organization is poisonous. So some of those things are very sensitive and it takes a long time to solve in companies today.
Yeah. So just open this one up to, I see Tanya, you've joined us as well. Thank you for joining. We've got some others as well. Just curious if there's any comments from the audience. Are we getting better? Are leaders getting better? Do they understand what's happening? Or are we getting more or is the gap growing? What's happening out there? Any ideas? Rosa, you got any thoughts?
I'm writing, I'm about to publish another book, and the focus is voices in OHS, and it's a resounding no growth.
Mm,
Absolutely not. And it's especially difficult for people in the support functions like OHS, HR,
mm,
OD, where you're tasked with creating these miracles without any power and insufficient resources. So what we've managed to do is create a whole nother level of stress and lack of mental health in the people that are out there doing the work with the front line of supporting human beings. And it's like nurses, right? They're not supported, they're not heard, they're not listened to. So enough said. I see that Tamara and Tanya have their hands up.
Tanya, why don't you go ahead?
Mhm.
You want to mute yourself and join us?
Oh, tomorrow was first though.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay.
That's okay. I like that we're talking about creating safe spaces for employees, because a lot of employees are marginalized and they do need leadership to support and provide a helping hand. But I think that what my learnings over the past 10 years is also that leaders also can be in positions where they are not feeling safe and are frightened. And this fear of what might happen to them if they speak up immobilizes them as well. And I think that needs to also be brought into the conversation, because it's not just one group that's paralyzed by this fear. It goes further, and it can go right up to an executive sitting on the board in that boardroom, being there. And we all think as employees, they have this power and they can have this influence. And then we learn later that what we thought was just an illusion. So I just wanted to put that on the table for our thoughts. Tanya, you also had your hand up. What were you going to share?
Well, you also brought up something that I heard Todd Conklin talk about, like in the heart of the pandemic, that he was talking to some leaders, probably on a virtual platform, who he called it playing the victim card. Like, I'm a victim of all of this. And he said, but you're the boss. Like, what do you mean? you do have the decision-making authority to do things. Why are you saying that you're trapped and you're a victim here? So like, he thought that was worth calling out, because I think he's right, that if you actually do have the decision-making authority, the money, the power and everything, why are you saying I'm trapped? Like, this isn't realistic. But what I was going to raise was, I was raised in the 70s a bit, and there was a lot of influence of unions back then, but never have I seen the number of institutions on strike right now. I mean, I just heard that the auto workers are on strike in the States, and Hollywood's been on strike for a while. You mentioned grocery stores, Faith. Like, it looks as though unions have started to become more present than they have been in like 30 years, starting to affect the way that leaders might think people enjoy their workplaces.
Good point. All right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I want to get back to the book now, and the title of your book, Faith, is Beyond These Eyes. So very intriguing. And why did you choose this title?
Yeah. So that wasn't the original title. The original title was going to be Maroon Child, which would talk about my childhood. So my family comes from a background of Maroons, who were the escaped enslaved people in Jamaica. And that was the original title, but I don't spend a lot of time talking about the Maroons, for one. And then secondly, there were some political issues happening at the time I was being published with the Maroons and the government of Jamaica. And I just thought it wasn't the right time to do this. It would confuse the issues. So my aunt and I, my Aunt Vita, that is still very much alive and still very much a mentor of mine, we were brainstorming. And the whole theme is, look beyond what you see, right? Tamara touched on it in the intro is, I know that I have this big, huge title, but, who am I as a person? And it was really trying to focus people on, we are all individuals and we all have stories. So just look further, beyond the eyes. So that's what I got to.
Okay. So when
Yeah,
you,
I'm just going to actually chirp in here for one moment. Because when reading your book, it was interesting, some of the themes, Faith, that came out that I didn't even think about, being from a different background than you, that you would have had to deal with walking through life. And so one of them was about colorism. And for those of you who have the book, it's on page 46. And you talk about judging Black people based on the value of judging Black people's value according to their skin tone.
Yeah.
And I knew that there was that between white race and Black race, etc., right? And I had heard in the grapevine of life about a similar thing within the Black community. But your book brought it to life, so I could totally have a better understanding of you as a woman and what you had gone through, about the biases and everything that you grew up in, and that you had experienced being ostracized, which is something that I had come to you and talked about. But when I first talked to you about it, I didn't think that you maybe understood because of your title. And I'm sorry for my ignorance. But it goes back to personalizing our leadership.
Yeah.
So that we understand that maybe they do understand better than we think.
Yeah.
What we may be going through right now.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's a complex issue, the whole colorism, and it's not just externally you're facing it, but internally you're facing it because, of, what I'll call some of the brainwashing, and, just some of the things that we grew up with thinking were wrong or were better. And it all goes back to, when enslaved people, like the lighter skinned folks, could work inside the house and the darker skinned stayed in the field. So then we internalize that and institutionalize that in our mind as a society, so that, a couple of years ago, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, if you went to any established organizations in Jamaica, the lighter skinned folks would have the plum jobs. And they would be the ones in the banks and the governments and the front facing. And then the darker folks are, behind the scenes. So even within our own communities, so my book goes up to age 10. So we were facing that within our own communities. So it's re-educating ourselves to understand our own personal values. So that is a bigger complex issue. I tried to touch on multiple things in the book just to give people a taste, of some of the things that an individual could be facing or dealing with internally that you just won't see or you won't know because of how they present themselves or their titles. So I appreciate your trust in, first coming to me, and secondly, trusting me with keeping in confidence, some of the things we talked about. But, having that listening ear is always something that I advocate, in myself and other leaders on my team, to ensure that people feel safe, right? Yeah. But huge issues, that we face, not just externally, but internally within our own communities, that we have to think about in organizations where you just can't take it at face value that you know everything about a person.
Yeah, right. I should mention that this is your first book in maybe a series of books, and this book really covers your experiences growing up in Jamaica and goes up to age 10, because your last chapter says you land in Toronto as a 10-year-old immigrant, right?
Yeah.
So it's very clear, okay, this is, if you're going to do a series of books, this is where the first one ends. So can we talk a bit about your next decade in your life in Canada? So what sort of personal struggles did you start feeling?
Yeah, so first of all, I did want to separate the Jamaica experience from the Canadian experience because they're vastly different. And the first book was foundation building. So a lot of the themes that we're talking about right now, it's not there yet. It's really just to lay the foundation of this individual. So the next decades were really, immigrating to Canada, assimilating in Canada. I grew up in the 70s as well. Tanya, you mentioned that. Oh my goodness, what a different place, right? It was dealing with blatant, racism. We come from Jamaica where we were the majority, and then we come to Canada where the minority. So it's dealing with blatant racism and how we navigated that. Dealing with our socioeconomic climate, where I grew up in government housing, for instance, and how we navigate that. Dealing with the education system that automatically, put you back because you came from the Caribbean. 90% of the folks that were around me experienced this. They put you back a grade. And just really trying to navigate being one of the only in a class of 30. And not necessarily having the mentors and the sponsors and your teachers, because some of them are blatant racists as well. So it's navigating the world and understanding what works, and losing our accents really quickly just to we already showed up different, so we didn't want to speak differently. So driving in ourselves to have that grammar that was acceptable. So it's going through all of that, Gary, but I'm going to quickly move through that to get to more on the work side and the professional side and the leadership side, and some of the lessons that we could take as leaders, and to take to the next level of coaching and mentoring people of different backgrounds. And it's really going to be more encouraging folks on that level.
Yeah. Okay. Rosa, is your hand up? Oh, unmute.
Okay, there you go. This is a very personal ask, Faith. Because I was raised in Mexico for the first 10 years, and then I came here. So our experiences are very similar, including the fact that my grandmother always said, "Stay out of the sun, you're already dark enough." Yeah, but in the workplace, which you're going to get into, how do you balance your personal feelings of rejection and not being heard, not being seen, just constantly encountering the mentality of people who haven't lived it, so they don't understand, and not get angry, but just keep forward teaching without feeling resentful. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like,
Oh, I know. Yes.
Okay. I'd love to hear your experience with that.
Yeah. So, my goodness, I don't know if I've ever balanced it. I've expressed frustration, anger, resentment, the whole 9 yards. And really, channeling that outside of the workplace, 9 times out of 10, where I felt safe to voice, some of the frustration and the call outs, with leaders. I will do that, where it just becomes untenable to the point that I need to voice it. I will do that. Early in my career, of course, where I wasn't as confident or as brave or didn't have the position or the title, I kept my mouth shut. A lot of us did that. And because you don't want to be seen as having a chip on your shoulder or play into some of the stereotypes. So I grew, obviously in my confidence, and not just by being promoted, but just life. After a certain age, you realize what's the worst that can happen, right? So then you get to the point of being able to voice it. And I tried my best to do it from an education standpoint, to invite people in where they're more open to listen and they're ready to listen. But certainly being at the table, gave me the autonomy to be able to raise these issues so that the senior leaders would listen. And I really worked hard to be the voice of people around me, not just myself, because there are, women issues, there's the LGBTQ plus community issues. There are many issues that we're tasked with bringing to the table. So we ensured that we brought it to the table. So even in an organization where we knew that folks were on food stamps, for instance, the senior executives didn't know that. So when making decisions, I would say, well, do you realize that this percentage of people in this division were on food stamps? Is this the organization that we want to, project out in the field? So it's bringing those issues to the table because I now had that voice and I had that authority to do so. But it's a long journey. I don't get less frustrated. I really try to channel that into education and ensuring that, where I had the voice, I used my voice. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Do you have like a therapist or a coach?
Yes. Coaches, therapists.
Okay, that's good.
They are on standby.
Me too. Me too.
Yes. Yes.
I guess one of my questions from looking at it from a health and safety professional position point of view is the health and safety professional is one of your unique human resources that moves around the organization and gets to have touch points with a lot of the human resources.
Mhm.
So what would your advice be to them to become that personable, more engaging, knowledge collecting individual in the organization? And how can they provide that insight and knowledge to others in the organization who are at more senior levels that might benefit from getting it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. A lot of times the health and safety professionals are not at the director level or VP level, decision-making level, right? So they end up reporting to these more senior folks who have a million other things on their plates and they're not prioritizing it. Organizations typically see it as a compliance thing. I was once called a compliance person, very derogatorily. And, I had to put that senior leader in their place when I had a moment. But it's really ensuring that the people that you report to as a safety professional understands the importance of what you do and that the organization receives you with open arms. Whereas people, they're typically say, oh my God, here we go again, another safety check or, another inspection, or we got to fill this form out. It should be top of mind, where you're mitigating the risks for these organizations and you're keeping them compliant and you're keeping them in business, to be honest with you. So at the end of the day, ensuring that your leaders understand the value and your leaders are tabling it at the appropriate time and encouraging the organization to welcome you with open arms. You asked about the personalities. It's, I can't coach on personality types, but it really is understanding how to communicate and how to influence without authority. So some of those programs, are offered on whether it's LinkedIn or, within your internal L&D department. So it really is an influential role, and learning, how to do that and do that effectively, that would help.
I see, Tanya, you have your hand up.
I was just wondering if you could marry that strategy that you just described, Faith, with maybe a little bit of a different approach of the safety professional learning that myriad of things that the vice president or whomever they report to do, and aligning their message with one of these other things that likely is going to get more attention than just labeling it as safety, so that you can demonstrate, what this is part of the business here. It's not this external thing. This is very harmonious with, I don't know, this campaign that you're running on, whatever, and trying to get their attention that way.
Love what you just said. And it really is tying. So everything you do, whether it's in HR, whether it's in health and safety, it should tie directly to the organization strategy. So you're absolutely on point, Tanya. It's tying it back to that strategy and showing how it can be measured and how it can impact those strategies. 100%.
Yeah, and when you talk about strategies, I'll even go to the point where we're talking about immigration strategy. I don't think we talk about that in organizations. We just realize there's an infinite pool of available people out there. We just send out a recruitment bulletin and we just pick and choose off that. While I know in Canada, and particularly people here that are Canadians, immigration is really, really important in Canada, because our demographics are the point where we're not going up, we're going down. And I'm a prime example where I have 3 adult kids, but I only have 2 grandkids. So I'm not meeting that magical 2.1 number. So if we're going to kind of sustain and grow in Canada, we have to bring in people. And so immigration has been really, really important to us. When you talk about aligning priorities of business, do you ever, or have you ever had the opportunity to talk about how do we kind of align with the immigration strategies of the bigger thing called Canada?
Yeah, that is where it's a great point. And I'm with you. Like, I only have 1 child, so I'm missing that 2.1 number as well. It's a great point from a talent acquisition perspective, where you look at, what are the gaps in your organization when you're doing your workforce planning? What are the gaps? How are you going to fill those gaps? It's not always with the current individuals you have. Maybe it's not always with the external market immediately, within your scope, but it's through immigration. And we've seen that grow in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, where we're looking at talent coming from, like the APAC region, or, you're looking at a lot of even European, where, people were hiring folks from the Ukraine and so forth. So sometimes there are specialized skills that you just can't immediately find. So you have to work with Economic Development Canada, really to look at where else can we find this talent and get them in quickly, instead of it going through this huge long application process where you have to show that you've advertised all over Canada, you've interviewed this many people, blah, blah, blah. It's really, how can we shorten that so that we could fill some of the skills gap? So it's really working with the government bodies to highlight and target the gaps, and the government helping you to fill those gaps quicker. So immigration is huge right now in terms of some of the gaps, especially with the growth of tech, right? So working with Mars Discovery District, I work with a lot of startup firms that are doing cool, sexy things with technology that we're not that familiar with. So where else in the world can you find that? So it's working in partnership with government bodies to do that.
Right.
One question I also have in this area too, because I'm finding it a struggle. I have a lot of people who actually come to me saying, hey, how can I live in XYZ country, not Canada. How can I become a health and safety professional over in Canada? And I remember one individual I helped bring over, and it was such a complex and unclear pathway, right to even the interview, where when I was their what is it? Your
Sponsor?
referral? No, you call somebody up to give them a recommend. I was their person who, for the recommendation. And even the person on the other side of the phone, who actually was an immigrant themselves, was saying to me about, oh, well, they don't have any Canadian experience.
Mm.
And I'm like, we're finally at the end, the person's got interviews and stuff. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? You just told me that you're not from Canada yourself. And then you turn around and say this. So I just I put it back and I said, but I thought at the beginning of our conversation, you said that you immigrated from Canada. And they're like, yeah. And I said, so how did you get your Canadian experience? Right.
for
And
you.
educating people that if you don't give people an opportunity to gain the experience they need, we're never going to get out of this situation. So I
Yes.
wonder, is there something from an HR perspective maybe you could recommend that we start doing as health and safety professionals in associations like ASSP, CSSE, etc., in order to help these individuals who we're in contact with? Sorry if that's out of your scope, but
Yeah, it's a big question, right? Because I do believe that the government plays a big role. You know, we open the doors to say we need, but then we put up, you know, some roadblocks, you know, where, you know, organizations are now, well, I can't hire them because they don't have Canadian experience. You know, what is that? You know, when you think about it, if the person has the relevant experience in their home countries. And, you know, when you think about the fact that some people have to make decisions when they get here, it's either I wait to work in my profession or I get work to feed my family. So a lot of times employers or institutions within Canada will ask for accreditation, you know, where you have to go back and get accredited to be, you know, a doctor, an engineer, a health and safety professional within Canada. So you have to find the money to do that, the time to do that. At the same time, you need to eat. So some of those decisions are tough. I think one of the things I could, you know, throw out to you is to, you know, have folks either volunteer in your organizations while they're going to school, give them opportunities from a co-op perspective. I generally encourage folks to take on educational focus with a co-op or internship focus, you know, where they can get some of that experience. So they don't come in completely without Canadian experience. But that does frustrate me, that whole Canadian experience. I really believe that we do have to give people an experience first, or give them a chance first. Even if it's at an entry level, folks are willing to do that. But to close the door completely and to shy away from folks' accomplishments and educational accomplishments, some of these folks have PhDs, right? So they can do something. So it's really challenging organizations to open their minds a little bit to what benefit they can have from some of these experiences. But also, I believe that the government needs to play a role in educating and opening up organizations' minds to hiring folks, you know, without that Canadian experience, and just look at what else you can do. And maybe it's putting more money into training and development and making it easier for folks to earn a living, you know, while they're trying to get that accreditation. Like it's I don't have a big one solution, but, you know, I would recommend giving folks a chance from a co-op or internship or volunteer perspective.
Good idea, right? Tanya.
I just came from a conference in Toronto from a company that's actually based in India. It's a software company. They take pride in a whole bunch of things that normal companies don't do. One of the things they do is they go to underserved areas in India and offer a 4-year training that is done by the company, not by a university or anything. And these people are now project managers of a lot of the product suite that the conference was there to showcase, you know. So they by design locate their services. They're international. They locate their services in smaller areas that aren't necessarily known internationally, because that they believe is the underserved talent. They just don't get the opportunities that the New Yorks and, Silicon Valleys and Torontos and Montreals and Vancouvers and everything do get. And, they got applause for doing that, because I don't think there are enough companies that realize it is up to you maybe to take on a little bit more of the burden of what you were just saying that the government should be doing. And sure, the government does have a role to play in this, but they are a private company and they are wanting to make sure that people have the opportunity, that they don't have to travel and all the barriers and things that otherwise they would have. And and they're great people, and they're doing fantastic work. So I remember listening to a podcast that the DE&I, when it came on the as you had said, is just a tokenism now, but saying, oh, well, I mean, there just aren't any Black people in my community. And they said, oh yes, there are. You're not doing the homework to figure out how to access them. If you wanted to, you could. It's just that you're not, you think that as soon as you put something on your website, everybody's going to fly to your website, and that's not how this works.
Right.
Mhm.
Great point.
Really good point. This conversation we're having a bit about governments, co-ops, and everything else made me think about the aging issue and the fact that people are going to be retiring, and as retired, they go out the door and they take all that knowledge and skills with them. So it comes back to what we call the master apprenticeship model. And a lot of people don't realize it, and I'll put in a plug for scientific management, Taylorism, because a lot of people don't realize the master apprenticeship model was very key in scientific management. And the whole idea is that you've got some of the body knowledge, and how do you transfer that knowledge over to the young person to work with them? We've noticed that in some countries, like in Germany, they support that very strongly. When you graduate from high school, you join a company, and the company actually takes you on an apprentice, and you go through the 4 years. Where it seems our model is come out of high school, you go to university, trade school, and then some company will hire you after 2 or 3 years. So you got to look at, okay, there's different ways of approaching it. And the whole idea is that how do you get that knowledge transferred? Because you talked a bit about, again, talent recruitment and attraction.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a lot of sense that if a company really understands they've got an aging issue, they better start bringing in the people from below so that we can start growing them.
Absolutely. There was it reminded me of an organization I worked for called Sanofi Pasteur, and we were dealing with the aging issue with our electricians and millwrights and mechanical engineers and so forth. So we realized the competition was stiff externally, and it was so cumbersome to get them externally overseas. So we started to grow our own talent, and we implemented an apprenticeship program, which was beautiful. And it's something that I encourage a lot of organizations to do. And it's not just for the trades, but it's developers as well. You might not have an intermediate developer or senior developer now, but what are you doing to look outside of the traditional and look at people internally that you could put into some type of apprenticeship program? So that is something that I'm 100% support of. And that would help with the mentoring and, looking outside of the box for people with different skills that have some transferable skills that can be trained to do some of these roles that we find that people are, yes, we're having an aging population. We no longer have that forced retirement age, but you're right. We're still going to be losing some of that, intellectual property that people take with them when they live.
Yeah, I think we've got another topic down the road where we maybe talk a bit about the gig economy versus apprenticeships, and bring in some interesting speakers about that. Okay.
Did you see Tanya had her hand up?
Can I just ask a question on what Faith just talked about there, Gary?
Sure, yeah.
Faith, I was in the previous organization I worked for was trying to set up this model that you and Gary just talked about. And a lot of the people who were the so-called mentors, were just kind of told, okay, you're a mentor. And they became unrealistically possessive of their knowledge. Like, no way. It took me 40 years to get to where I am. You're telling me that you're going to give to train somebody just out of school? Bullshit, I'm not doing that. And this was pervasive, and I'm like, holy crow. Obviously the organization did not understand how people were going to react. And I just wanted to know if you had encountered that.
Yes, absolutely. And it's the gatekeepers, right? And they're also trying to protect themselves because they think there's something behind it. They're trying to get rid of me sooner than I want to go. It really is about communicating the change and communicating why. And it's over communicating. If you talk to anybody in change management, you can't communicate enough. And it really is bringing people along that journey and talking about the reason for the strategy and, getting them engaged to the point where they don't feel threatened. People are pushing back because they feel threatened somehow. Or we just need to get out of the mindset of, I had to struggle, I had to wait 20 years for a promotion. We need to get out of that mindset and drop it. It's a different day and age. I caught myself saying it, and my daughter, who's 24, continues to remind me, that doesn't mean anything to us, Mom. We understand, what you went through, we respect it, but it's a different day and age. So it really is educating people and bringing them along the journey and being transparent with them so they don't feel that you've got, some other priority.
Yeah.
I'm just going to hop in here for 1 second because I find this really intriguing, because when my dad started being a butcher, he started as a young man. He was a junior, and the whole master apprenticeship thing was totally a thing in that era. Right back in the 30s. And so I don't know if you can see this. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So right here is the headmaster butcher. And these individuals here are in that program at different levels. And my dad, hold on, I'm going to show you my dad, is right here. Okay, so that was my dad at the beginning stage of his career becoming a butcher, right? And then his partner, Joe. And so from there, they went from being one of those many people to being taught how to have their own shop. And that's what fed our family. So I'm thinking, how did we get from there where it was really a thing that you just did, right? Like, he couldn't become the master butcher if he didn't go through the apprenticeship. It was just like, this is the way we do it. How did we get to this place where now we've got Tanya sharing how people are being closed arms and not wanting to give it up? Like,
Go ahead, Gary.
I don't know if we can explain that in the last 5 minutes. That's a whole area, and I'll just briefly mention tomorrow, maybe it will be a show where we talk about how we shifted from the scientific management to the systems thinking era. And then all of a sudden, and quickly, how humans went from being cogs of a machine into humans or hazards, a part of a process technology sort of era, to now where I think we're into this era of complexity, cognitive complexity, where humans actually are treated as storytellers and heroes. for keeping things going. So like I said, that's about it in 30 seconds. Okay, so just the last question I want to ask about is this thing about back to immigrations, but talking about psychological safety for immigrants. Is there any kind of suggestions you've got there, Faith, that if you're bringing on these new people, because you need to keep your company going, and they are immigrants and you've accepted it, how do you make them psychologically safe, feel safe?
Part of what organizations can do is to just understand human beings, period, in terms of the backgrounds that they come from, and that they're coming from cultures very different from ours. So not expecting the same reactions to certain things. So, a quick example is like the whole idea of, let's go for drinks after work. Not every culture is okay with that. Because A, they either don't drink, or B, their responsibilities extends beyond work. Some of them have part-time jobs as well, especially if they're entry level. So it's not just doing the old boys club thing and blanketing that with everybody that you bring into the organization and expect them to fit, right? So it's really looking at, you're bringing folks on to be an addition and a complement to your organization. Let me spend time to understand their motivations and their drives and what encourages them, and, getting to know people as human beings. We're not just, the cogs, or we're not just the ones making the widgets. We're humans bringing our whole selves to organizations for 8 to 10 hours, maybe even more a day. So it's really understanding what drives them, and, building programs to add some of those team dynamics, and bringing diverse things, that you're not used to doing on a regular basis. So it really is spending time to educate yourself on what's important to folks, and extending yourself to show that you really care about them and you're trying to build an inclusive culture.
Great, thank you. Okay. Any other questions from anybody else? This has been quite a wide variety of topics.
Yeah, I asked Tanya if I could have a transcript of this call, because I think it's a book in itself, to tell you the truth. And it's so basic, because we're not good at accepting new people, period. And I mean, you can add new layers, like if they're from a different country and they're threatening your job. I mean, I can't believe we're always here in the States. It's always that the immigrants are taking away jobs from the people that were born here, things of that nature. But it's just, and I don't think it's ever been different, or it will be different, that we need to develop conscious leaders that are aware of these dynamics and have the tools and confidence to deal with the dynamics. And I don't think there's an easy way to do that.
And I think that might be another session where we can talk further about what you and Rosa and I have often talked about, which is conscious inclusion or intentional inclusion, right? And how we should be, as leaders, being more mindful of when we are reaching out to ask talent to come onto committees, etc. And Faith, you did that when you were working at, we were working together, you started doing that process. So I'm going to put a pin there, because I don't know spoilers for the next time, but I think that's another conversation to have, is like, are you doing intentional inclusion as a leader, and what does that mean?
Well, I think that could be the topic when Faith writes her second book and we bring her back on. We can talk about what sort of progress have we made? Are we gone forward, or are we going backwards on this whole thing? And for me, the fact that we have to deliberately and intentionally talk about says we got a long way to go. I want to get to the point where we don't even have to talk about this anymore. It just happens. So, well, we're at the top of the hour. So, Faith, I like to always end these Meet the Author shows with 3 takeaways. this may be a bit difficult because we covered a lot of stuff, but if you want to talk about 3 takeaways you want to leave with us, what would they be?
I think, one of them would be realizing that our workplaces are, a microcosm of society, in terms of all the differences that we have in terms of the different types of people, their backgrounds, their genders, their orientations and their identifications. And it's really just being open to accepting and embracing and encouraging people of all types. That would be one. The other is, life is about stories and we all have stories. So, not making assumptions about individuals, but understanding and getting to learn about each other's stories. And in that you can find some, communities and connections. And then finally, it's really looking at all layers of the organization and ensuring that you've got diverse representation there. Far too often, and I still see it now, that the representation is below the executive level and below the board level. I mean, that's a whole other topic, but it's really challenging ourselves to look at all levels of the organization and ensuring that we've got diversity and diverse voices and people there.
That's awesome. Great. Well, brings the end of another show tomorrow, so I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, thank you, Gary. And thank you, Faith, for carving out some time. I know your schedule is very busy. And this has been an amazing conversation that we don't want to end. I know that for me, for sure. But I'm glad that you joined us and took the risk of sharing your book, because I know you were a little hesitant because it wasn't about health and safety. And I said, well, it's good that we get out of our own box and start looking at other individuals in our organizations and how we can start understanding one another. And what a beautiful place then your story in your book of Beyond These Eyes. So thank you for that. And thank you, Gary, again, for volunteering to be our co-host. We wouldn't be able to do this if we didn't have somebody like yourself to step forward and get this all organized behind the scenes and then do the session. And for those of you who are listening who have joined us today, we wouldn't even have this show if you didn't show up. So thank you, everybody, once again, for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you in the next show.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.